Welcome everyone to TAMA Talks, brought to you by the Torrance Art Museum Advocates. I'm Janine Madden, current TAMA president, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Today's talk will feature work currently on view at the museum from the exhibition Uncivil War, an Election Special in the main gallery. If you're planning on a trip to Torrance, take some time to stop in and see the show before it closes on December 10th. TAM hours are Tuesday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Admission to the museum is free and donations are accepted and appreciated. You can find information about the museum on the web at www.torranceartmuseum.com. This discussion will be recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel with all of our previous TAMA talks. You can access it through our website, www.tamadvocates.com. The TAM summarizes Uncivil War, an Election Special, as an exhibition which explores the events of January 6, 2021, in Washington, D.C., which shocked the nation. The country has felt a divided space with a polarization and demonizing of opposition that has left many citizens in fear that a spark could ignite the fires of civil war. There has been a steady build in journalist articles reflecting upon the possibility of a second U.S. Civil War. Regardless of the realities of this, the fact remains that this concern is a part of the current zeitgeist. What will the current midterm elections bring us? Increased enmity or a rejection of extremism? Will democracy win out, or will armed insurrection begin? Or will the status quo continue to stoke the embers of discontent? This exhibition is curated by MAX PRESNEILL, the Director and Head Curator at the museum. Uncivil War features artists Lisa Ann Auerbach, Diana Sofia Estrada, Michelle Jacques, Essie Miro, Jeremy J. Quinn, Dred Scott, Allison Stewart, Gabby Strong, Sandow Burke, Bruce Yanamoto, and Keith Walsh, who joins us today. Keith lives in Inglewood, California. His research and drawings recover and map the history of radical politics and liberation coalitions in the United States and Los Angeles. His art fosters new dialogue about America's socialist political legacies in relation to contemporary political context and the fusion of art and activism. I would like to read his artist statement, which he submitted for Uncivil War, an Election Special. Curator Max Presneill has selected 5 drawings of mine that look different, but are unified by my intention to make visible the voices and histories of the political left in the United States. They reflect the extensive research that undergirds my practice and inspires me to express information in new and visually dynamic ways. I think and draw in a semantic and political manner. Each work reflects my understanding of the political left in its programmatic, rhetorical, tactical, theoretical, and contextual aspects. The Socialist Workers' Party and its descendants maps anew the evolution of the Trotskyist spectrum in the USA since 1933, some of its activists, electoral tallies, and its many schisms whose political position may veer leftward or rightward. This chart includes many influential world events up to early 2021 when the peace was completed. Antifa Feels Like Tomorrow reflects the jagged skirmish of anti-fascists in the contemporary field of protest against reactionary forces, one that recalls the 1919 Red Scare and futurists and Dadaist art. The other 3 drawings are from a series where visual optics, a la modernist op art, is a metaphor for political optics. Within the pulsating color cells are rhythmic distributions of concise and profound statements by Huey P. Newton of the Black Panther Party, Alicia Garza, Black Lives Matter, and Bolshevist revolutionary Leon Trotsky that I have encountered during my research. All 5 drawings are forms of time travel that connect history with our contemporary situation. They illuminate facets of the American political spectrum that nationalist mythologies routinely denigrate and corporate media ignores. Communities that have been fighting for progressive rights and self-determination for 150 years, right up to this very moment. So thank you so much, Keith, for joining us today. This is going to be quite an extraordinary conversation. So I'm going to let you get the ball rolling.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. It's really great to be on the show. I tailored that particular statement to the show so that a viewer could see my sense of relationships, of the context to what I'm talking about through my work, because it can be kind of daunting to look at. And for this presentation, I've included a number of my charts to give the audience a sense of the background and where the SWP chart, the big one that's in the TAM show, sort of fits into my paradigm. And these were two early charts that were completed in 2017 and 2019, and they're called Black Liberation and Socialism in America. They are research-based, and they connect all different kinds of players and influences within the political left, particularly the African-American radical left in the United States, and of course a few influences beyond, such as Bakunin and Marx, etc. But these particular relationships are often discussed, in books and literature, and sometimes to a certain extent in various radical literature, such as the Black Panther Party, newspapers, etc. But my charts really capture for the first time a flow chart sequential from the bottom up, okay, a kind of activism from below, so to speak, really for the first time. And so I have done this in a schematic, very direct way, but the relationships, I think maybe the outcome can be kind of mesmerizing, because they are very complex. I'm making a lot of decisions about who is on the political left or right of another individual, and according to their party affiliation or their particular kind of nationalism, or were they pacifists, were they communists, and so forth. And so the image on the left was the first version that's currently in the Angela Davis Sees the Time show, which is now in Oakland, California, at the Oakland Museum of California right now. And the one on the right was its follow-up piece for the same collector who bought the first. And for that one, by that time, my research was able to flesh out more connections, and I also included more women activists in this particular larger piece. The one on the left is about 24 by 19, and the other one is about 30 inches high or so. So it is larger, and it really it shows a crowded field. And I'm very interested in graphic connections. I've always been interested in network charts, flow charts from different kinds of social sources. And this is my way of speaking about connections in as direct a way as possible, and in a very graphic and straightforward way that creates lots of visual interest. I'm really intending with these two charts, as well as everything else that I make, to really make what is very often hidden social and political history visible.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Before you move on to the next one. So
yes.
Do you choose then to sort of overwhelm by keeping it on the size of the canvas that you've chosen, where when you're getting more and more data, as opposed
Mhm.
to making it like a big Guernica size piece, do you choose to,
Right.
do you choose then to keep it small so that that data is really compressed and forces us to systematically look through it in a very concise, attentive way?
I think that's correct. Um, also, I find it more of a direct experience, like the sense of like desktop drawing in the old-fashioned sense. Um, that an intimate scale means affordable materials such as the paper is affordable to purchase, but also it's portable, and also I really don't have that much space in my house to hang big pieces. So for instance, I can't really hang the SWP chart that's now at the TAM because it's bigger than my walls. So I'm always thinking about these constraints, and I'm always trying to activate even little fields as much as possible. And you'll see a few examples down the road in my presentation. So I'm going to move on to the next one here. Let me see if I can. Okay, do this. So I tend to start out my process with various handwritten notes. I have plenty of notebooks of collected information that I rely upon. Plenty of picture files on my desktop, and believe it or not, lots of rough sketches and things. And they usually coalesce into small flyer-sized studies, like 11 by 8.5. That one prints out on their home printer, or take to a copy machine, the way that flyers used to be done. And so these are very intimate, small scale prototype drawings or mock-ups. And so the example of the large one, which is at TAM right now, the Antifa piece, was preceded by an 8.5 by 11 study of a similar sort. And you can see that there's a lot of correspondence between the two pieces, but there are a few evolutionary differences that I tend to allow to happen because of that enlargement in the scale. And the piece that's at the right, which is now at the TAM, is about 22 inches wide by about 30 inches high. So there's more visual space within the field, and sometimes that allows me to do certain things or make certain things graphically pop quite a bit more. So the small studies really allow me to work expediently, even though these are, the study on the left is very refined and hard-edged. And I'll admit that it really was a very spontaneous method of composing. And sometimes this does happen. Sometimes the coalescence of the information takes me multiple tries. But you can see the relationship between small scale and larger scale. And that happens a lot in my practice. There's a ricochet-like quality to this, and the kind of haywire visual qualities and sort of confrontational qualities of certain color, form, geometric shape, body of language, butting up next to or in opposition or juxtaposition to another, brings me toward a communication of the content, but also what seemed to be really at the bases of my formal roots, which include Dada and Futurism and Constructivism. And these are particular visual historical languages that are historically rooted in the political left in many countries, here in the United States as well as Europe. And so the sense of the visual language corresponds with the political content, or at least the tenor of the work that I'm trying to create. And so that's where style is bound to content. And so there's that ricochet overlapping kind of quality. It's very text heavy. I love language. I love the look of language. I like language as information. I really play around with the scaling or pagination, as it's called, of language quite a bit. The way things visually pop and recede and layer in space and make it something very interesting for people to hang around and look at for more than a quick glimpse. As we know, a lot of art can be ascertained or engaged with in a very brief amount of time. Well, I tend to push people a little bit to make them hang in and soak it up. They can't get it right away. Next one.
Yes.
Okay. And to give you an example of how things start out, this is a chart called Trotsky Dialectics. I presented it at the Long Beach Museum of Art at Cal State Long Beach 2 years ago. And so the right side image is the final version. And so it's colored pencil and some obviously ink for the lettering. It's all hand lettered, by the way. And I think a little bit of acrylic or tempers in the mix as well. But it's formality, its structural tensions are really informed by more preliminary and expedient studies. And very often the studies will be for the charts on lined legal paper, you know, the yellow line paper, or sometimes when I'm really on a roll, I can just knock one out on drawing paper. And there's a fold in the middle because I scaled the piece in a way where I needed it to expand it. So I just grafted one sheet to another to continue the chart. But you can see the orientation of the various lines proceeding from the bottom, again, the historical strata, oldest time, 1917, up to about 1930, 1939, 1940 or so. And so it tries to get at dialectics, like some of my other charts, chronicles the various relationships between the development of socialism and communism, and in the Soviet Union, in America, and in this case, it includes Mexico as well. And there are various players, important people such as Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera and David Alfaro Segueros, who were involved in communist politics. And in fact, Segueros actually attempted to assassinate Trotsky in Mexico in 1940, a few months before another Stalinist agent got to Trotsky and finished him off. And so this really is drawing as thinking, and it's drawing as a kind of historical memorization. I can return to these pieces because everything is fact checked if I need to double check on, well, when did this happen? Because obviously there's a lot of history and a lot of information in here, and a lot you can forget or just kind of overlook. And now the direction of the lines are according to a leftward, which would be a more radical political inclination, versus a rightward, which would be more conservative, within, again, the left spectrum, of course. Or if it's just going straight up, there weren't too many ideological or methodological changes, it seems. So their theory and their practice was very closely aligned. And so that's where the movement of history and the directionality of history according to political position is something that helps guide me to produce the visuals. And so in some ways, these pieces are very self-organizing, which is a little more associated with certain aspects of conceptual art. But I do have to do a lot of parsing and interpretation and reasoning of, well, why do I think this particular group is a little bit to the left or right of another? And and when were the particular moments of interaction or merging, collisions, things like that that took place. On to the next one here. Here's a companion piece called Radical Power and Uncertainty, 1917, 1936 from 2019. And the image on the left is a shot of the piece on the right in process. And so you can see that my chart is partially done. You can see a lot of Post-it notes, just so that I get some of those salient points along the way. And then there's a very loose, I'd say almost gestural preliminary sketch. And this sketch was about 18 by 24, and you know, on casual drawing pad paper. And I wanted to rough it out, so to speak, as one would say in the graphics world. And I realized that I had my sense of mission and organization of the primary information and trajectories enough that I didn't want to spend too much time working on it, so I jumped to the big thing. Now, what's very remarkable about this piece is that it's all the colors you see are colored pencil, and so I went through dozens and dozens of colored pencils to make this piece. And there's some flash, which is a matte vinyl emulsion-based paint. It's water-based paint, but it dries really nice and flat, almost temper-like. And so that I use that for creating the atmospheric effects for some of the contrast and some of the backgrounds, such as on the left side, for instance. And but everything else is colored pencil. So I'm thinking about the radiance of the colored pencil too. Colored pencil is really, to make it is a lot of work, and I'm thinking about labor quite a bit. So my sense of labor of the making and the labor of love also is heavily invested in this particular piece. Again, I am mapping for the first time, even in the socialist political world, the visual convergences and departures or schisms of various groups, individuals, ideologies, and so forth. And so that's where a piece like this can have a dual function within the political world as well as the art world. And you know, I am throwing a lot of information at people within the art world. The art world people are not that used to reading quite a bit. That's why conceptual art back in the 60s and 70s was a pretty trying experience for many people. And but anyway, what I really enjoy about this particular piece, aside from the color work, is that I'm integrating the very, very important influence of the African Blood Brotherhood, which is that circle on the lower left. And they were Harlem radicals. It was actually a group that had mostly African-American radicals, including Claude McKay, the Harlem poet, but also included a few white radicals in the mix too. Other people like Grace Campbell and Otto Hewiswood, they became very engaged in communist politics, and actually, along with McKay, petitioned the Soviet Comintern in 1922 to advocate for Black civil rights. And so the Comintern, which is the giant meeting of all the branches of the government on an international level in Moscow, basically became the directive for what the American Party did. And the American Communist Party was very importantly contributed to civil rights activism during the late 20s into the mid 30s, primarily with its various front groups and labor groups. And this was decades before the Democratic Party and the mainstream United States Party even engaged in any kind of civil rights activism. And a lot of the Black communists eventually went into other kinds of civil rights activism in the 1950s and 60s. This particular piece is about 43 inches high, so it's a fairly large piece. Now, to my point earlier about scale here, the piece on the right, where my head is sticking into, it's called the Los Angeles Social Network, another chart that I made in 2019 that maps the various groups on the political left that existed here in Los Angeles. And there's still, even today, there's somewhere around 20 groups that are active to different degrees. And so I had to figure out the relationships between the various groups. So many of them causal, sometimes some of them are through association or coalitions. So the causality would be the red lines, and the pink lines would indicate association or coalitions, such as the Peace and Freedom Party in California, which still exists. They're, on our they're within our electoral politics even today. They worked together with the Black Panther Party of Oakland, which had a very important branch here in Los Angeles during the 60s, 70s, into the early 80s. And so there's a link to them between the two parties with a pink line. And so the layering is very complex. I'm thinking, again, left to right political sensibilities. And so there are various preliminary drawings, and such as the prototype on the far left, and that drawing really was about 4 by 6 inches. It was one of those little things that I was sketching on the sidelines during my teaching days. I'd be thinking about the relationships, and I would create the network. And then that eventually led to a small canvas. And I only work on canvas periodically. This was a really sweet little piece. You can see the size of my fingers there. So it's very small, maybe like 3.5 by 5. And it was for a show here in Inglewood that consisted of very small paintings. And so back to your point about working within a small sized field, it gave me this, luscious challenge of trying to see what I could fit and how I could even manage to write these things. So one of the things I started incorporating around this time when I made this piece, it was about mid-2019, so I started including the various portraits of individuals. So in the big picture, the big network, the final one, we have Charlene Mitchell, the African-American woman who was a mentor to Angela Davis, whom we all know. And she was a member of the Los Angeles branch of the Communist Party, and she really was one of the most important LA left activists, really from the 1940s up until about the 80s or so. She's still alive, I believe. She's very old. And then, so that image of her with the white gentleman next to him, is Mike Zagarel, who was the VP candidate, and she was the presidential candidate for the Communist Party ticket in 1968. And so this particular image is based upon a press photograph that I think was taken here in LA, if I remember correctly. Let me move to the next slide here. So here's to the SWP, the Socialist Worker Party, US. Giant piece is 72 inches high by about 43 inches wide. And that's the one that's on view at TAM. And that's really been my penultimate chart. It's really kind of hard to sort of beat that in scale. And this on the left was the first draft chart, as I call them, prototype, on 2 separate 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper taped together. And I'm using ink and pencil and marker to draft my positions and relationships at a very small scale. So you can see how the overall shape of the field changed, and some of the trajectories. You kind of have to look at the general gist of things, but the splits in both the study and the final piece are actually pretty much the same. To be honest with you, it took me 3 attempts to actually make the big chart, because I realized every single time that I started doing the final one that I needed more paper. I needed a bigger field. So try number 3, attempt number 3 is the one that you folks see at the museum. And so it really needed to be very large to get myself from the beginning of Trotskyism, which was a left opposition to Stalinist dictatorship, autocracy in the Soviet Union after 1928, and his particular effect upon the machinations of the American Communist Party and so forth. And so Trotsky was put on the run because he was expelled from the Soviet Union, and he fled from country to country between 1928 and 1940 when he was assassinated in Mexico City. Along the way, he became an important spokesperson for an alternative communist politics that fed a lot of activism on the left in the United States. Now, what's interesting is that all the fissures or schisms met up with somewhat more conservative socialist politics, and that would be the Socialist Party on the far right, that very straight line, or the Social Democrats. And the Social Democrats of the Socialist Party, or the party of Eugene Debs, who was a 6-time presidential candidate in the early 1900s, a very, very popular man who even won millions of votes when he was incarcerated after World War I because of Red Scare politics. The Trotskyists actually merged, a certain faction of them merged with more conservative socialist or social democratic wing of socialist politics, which eventually feeds up to the Democratic Socialists of America. And there's an image of AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's a very dynamic congressperson right now. And so they're kind of, the DNA of Trotskyism is in them, but they're not Trotskyists per se. And there's also deviations to the left. And so let me just point out the individuals. So Trotsky's at the bottom, and then above him, the gentleman with the pipe looking down, the glasses, that's James Cannon, one of the co-founders of the Socialist Worker Party in 1938. To his right, the gentleman with the mustache, that's Max Shachtman, and he eventually led a more sort of independent kind of socialist politics that fed eventually into the Socialist Party, but also fed more independent socialist activism, including the Berkeley free speech movement in the 1960s. And moving up toward the middle on the left at about 8 o'clock, the African-American gentleman with his head tilted, that's C.L.R. James, a Caribbean nationalist who emigrated to the UK and eventually to the United States until he was deported in 1953. And he carried on a certain variety of Trotskyist politics and eventually fled Trotskyism to develop a kind of more worker-based Marxist humanism. And that humanism was also related to Raya Dunayevskaya, the woman with the sort of large hair, kind of middle of the way up on the left. She was a colleague of his, and she also was Trotsky's secretary in Mexico City around 1938. The African-American gentleman center right was Paul Boutel, and he was a VP candidate in 1968 for the Socialist Worker Party. And he eventually Africanized his name to Kwame Samburo and became very important person within African-American socialist-oriented politics. And above him is Peter Cameo, the California activist from the Bay Area, I believe. And then he was the presidential candidate for SWP in '76. And that's Willie Mae Reed, African-American woman who was the VP candidate. So you can get a sense here simply by Cameo and Reed being together that there was an active work within left politics to racially integrate the tickets. So it was really far ahead of its time. And then, of course, we have AOC up at the top. On the sidebars and a few places in the middle of the chart, I've included various important social events that took place. And everything was fact checked, triple checked, which turned out to be a ton of work. But they're really very important in terms of political developments anywhere on the political spectrum, including the left. So the socialists would have debated these particular events and the issues and what the ramifications are, just like people are debating the ramifications of the war between Ukraine and Russia right now. And so my list goes all the way up to early 2021, where the top entry on the far right was coronavirus kills 500,000 people. And there's a note about the Trump attempted coup of the Capitol. Here's a detail at the top where you can read the information a little bit better. Again, this is the piece at TAM. I'm thinking a lot about how to organize things, but I can see how it could be very, very confusing. You really have to just follow the line and work your way up from the bottom. So historical strata is at the bottom, most recent time is up at the top. And the line width also, in this case, like up here at the top near AOC, the Green Party actually has a very large membership. So does DSA, or the Democratic Socialists of America, right now. So that's why their line gets a little bit wider. And if the line is really, really thin, it winds up being a very small group or a small sect. I'm going to move to the next slide here. Now, sometimes the charting activity gets its start in unconventional ways. And this one is called the Trotsky-Milovich Bolshevist tendency with chart. Now, why those things together? That's always a good question. Well, it was due to what I found to be an interesting convergence between the use of Kazimir Milovich's supremacist abstractions, this one being from 1915, if I'm correct, or the original one, being used by the Bolshevik tendency, which is in namesake a more recent group up here at the top of my chart. And it shows up on their website and their literature and their associated organ platypus. And so I found that a very, very interesting sensibility about that, how they're trying to portray radicality through what was deemed to be a radical art form. But of course, we're over 100 years later, and the question arises as to how radical Russian, suprematism and constructivism actually is anymore. Nevertheless, the Bolshevik tendency is a Trotskyist group. They call themselves an Orthodox Trotskyist group. And so I decided to take some liberty and fit Trotsky's visage with the logo of the BT over him. So he's looking through the logo as, as the embodiment of their political position. Now, this chart is, let me see, it's about 40 inches wide or so, about 30 some odd inches high. And that's colored pencil and ink and flash for the red lines. And then fine micron marker for the very small info, which you probably can't read here. But the Milovich piece, I decided to scale it according to its exact scale in a museum where it's located in Russia right now. And so there's the play of actuality and simulation and the kind of alternative world of charting all put together. They're all converging with this piece.
This is in Russia right now.
Yes, I can't remember exactly which Russian museum, but if you Google this particular 1915 piece, and I think it may be an untitled piece, you will find it. And the dimensions are something like 20 inches by 20.2 inches, which is the exact measurements. And I tried to match the color of the painting according to internet images that are out there. So there's that sense of translation through remote sources that I'm always dealing with. Now, sometimes my charts look a little bit more graphic than, let's say, like, collections of lines and things, although there are lines in this one. And this is one called 6 volumes. Now, the wedge shape here is of my own design, and I call it the socialist square principle, with its expansive principle as more possibility and freedom expands from its most base level. And so the base will be the bottom of the red square, and then that's why the trapezium shape expands at the top with greater opportunity. And it's reiterated through language here at the bottom. Now, I tend to think of my graphic form solid versus transparent, or opaque versus transparent, as being, let's say, more present versus more possible or tentative or provisional. And this provisional square at the bottom were very socialist sensibilities. They were actually pre-Marxist sensibilities that emerged in the first socialist group here in the United States in 1874, called the Social Democratic Party of North America. And then one of its legacy groups was the Socialist Labor Party, and that led to the Socialist Party of America in 1901 that Eugene Debs was affiliated with. And there's a version of that still exists today. And so I decided to take some the emergence of certain pivotal groups. And so the scale and prominence of the groups are implied by the scale of the wedge form here, and the idea that the socialist group, particularly the Democratic Socialists of America, which actually is the largest socialist group right now, consisting of somewhere between 900,000 members and 100,000 members, constitutes a growing constituency. And some people may argue that it's a growing movement as well. Mm-hmm. Now, the black bar at the right here indicates the degrees of freedom for African American population within the United States. So down here, the solid black bar would be the era of slavery. So that's why, and then this would have been Reconstruction here. And of course, that comes parallel to the dates that you see on the left-hand side. This one is about 22 wide by about 30 inches high. Many of my pieces are that size. This is a smaller one, a flyer scale piece. It's another kind of chart where I'm utilizing the graphic symbol that the Democratic Socialists of America use. Actually, it's the international symbol for socialism, and it varies from group to group and country to country, but it's the same kind of fist holding the rose icon. And but what I do here is that I link its outline graphic form, so it's a pretty earnest graphic depiction from its source, and then I connect it in a new graphic way to its historical roots, which was the Socialist Party in 1901, and so forth. And then I bring it up to some content about how dues membership can help various members or comrades who are of lower economic status who may have problems paying their dues, since when you belong to a group, you need to pay dues. So I'm integrating contemporary content with historical content and reworking some existing visual forms into a new hybrid. And so I'm also thinking about scale of text, direction of text, and the massing of text to other texts and where they are bottom to top. So directionality scale is very, very important. And of course, I'm like some of my other pieces, I'm really pushing the viewer to read a bit. You don't have to necessarily, they can enjoy it purely on visual terms, but sooner or later, they're probably going to want to, what am I supposed to read here? Now, talk about heavy reading. This one is called 4 of 8 Selected Notes, and it's based upon some in-depth research that I did into post-COINTELPRO FBI and CIA espionage and anti-left activities in the 1970s and early 1980s. And COINTELPRO was a counterintelligence program that targeted left organizations, particularly the African-American ones, such as the Black Panther Party, but they also targeted various groups of different degrees of radicality, let's say reputed seditionism. Okay, now seditionism right now is a big issue because of January 6th. So one of the things that they were talking about at congressional hearings, which these texts are derived from. So I combed through congressional hearings, many, many pages, and cherry picked various passages that kind of got to the nugget of what they were trying to talk about, what their issues were. And it kind of boils down in many ways to the detail here in the right. Now, if you look at the upper section here near my cursor, concentrating on conduct rather than ideology, that really boils down distills the dialogue that they were having. And at the time in 1982, after the ability of the FBI to surveil and interrupt and destroy various left groups was curtailed in the 1970s after the Watergate hearings. So there were reforms, congressional reforms that put something of a governing process upon the FBI. And of course, a lot of these particular reforms were dismantled during the Reagan years. And I found the particular group of organizations that they addressed to be kind of very curious, because they talked about seditionism, particularly through radical activities such as violent activity, which happened actually through the Weather Underground bombings and so forth, to be equated almost equally with more conservative or centrist socialist groups, such as the Socialist Worker Party, who never engaged in such violent activity. So this is all hand lettering, and I figured out how to paginate everything to get everything I wanted into. It was kind of a miracle. And there's a picture of Bob Dylan. So the Weathermen got their name from a Bob Dylan tune from Subterranean Homesick Blues, say you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. And then this strange cosmic shape is a monoprint. And I incorporate these different kinds of things into my pieces periodically. I like to have a combination of text, abstract elements, and representational elements in the mix. To me, it kind of gives me all the things that I like, and provides some variety through the work.
What are the
Uh,
circular numbers referring to?
Numbers are referring to the pages, but even that gets confusing because they were based on screenshots of the pages. So sometimes the page numbers would change as I'm going through these
Oh,
internet
sure.
files.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of play right there. This is currently in the Beth DeWoody collection in Miami. On to the next one here. Another small piece. I really enjoyed doing the portraiture aspect of my work, and this is of Kathleen Cleaver, who was one of the important women during the early Black Panther Party days after 1967. So that the Black Panther Party started in Oakland in October 1966, and she joined a year or two later. She was married for a number of years to Eldridge Cleaver, who was a presidential candidate on the Black Panther combination Black Panther Party and Peace and Freedom Party ticket in 1968. Anyway, what I try to do is I really try to connect with my sitters, so to speak, in portraiture parlance, and try to really communicate their soul and their presence in a very earnest way. So I'm not turning them into cartoons or distorting them. I'm really trying to communicate their earnest presence as much as possible. But I like combining that again with my own wedge form that you see below her, but also text that connects historical information and historical sensibilities to the contemporary moment. And of course, right now here being in the post-Roe situation after the recent ruling, the issue of women's equality is very, very important. And so I'm very interested in building this bridge between the past and the present and the future. What do we do? How does the past influence our ability to make decisions about political activism in the future? Here's a shot of my process. A lot of the small pieces engage collage. So the collage would be will consist of hand-drawn elements, photographic sourced elements, and then my own graphic elements, sometimes kind of taken from some previous pieces, or I will be typing out lines of language, particular phrases and such. Sometimes they're existing phrases, sometimes they're my own. And I will just collect this information and then I will composite them together. So I'm really working as a graphic artist and working on a small scale, and which led to the piece that I just showed right here.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of cutting and pasting and glue sticking. It's kind of rough and very fast, and then I tidy things up afterwards in the final or official piece. More about portraiture. This is the Johnson Forest Tendency, which was an acronym, or actually a nom de guerre for a small political faction that originated in the Trotskyist. And this is Raya Dunayevskaya on the left, C.L.R. James, and Grace Lee Boggs. All very important activists. Boggs is probably the best known by many people because she was involved in labor activism in Detroit with her husband, James Boggs, for many, many years, and influenced a lot of African-American radicals. C.L.R. James influenced all different kinds of radical tendencies amongst African-American and international Black activists during the course of his long life. He lived about into his late 80s. Raya Dunayevskaya is very well known for translating a lot of Karl Marx's texts, which were previously only in German. And her particular group that she eventually led, called News and Letters, still exists today. It's mostly a propaganda group or a publishing group. This very recent piece with Hal Draper was an independent socialist who was a mentor to the Berkeley free speech movement. And that particular view of him, first of all, there's not too many images of him or many of the activists who I'm interested in to begin with. And that's a very interesting condition or challenge when it comes to making my work. And if there are images of any of these people, these leaders, they're very often really low resolution, very pixelated images. So the degree of my sort of searching for their essence and representation is a very important tact when I'm making my work. This particular almost Hollywood-ish kind of shot of him, if you saw the original, you would agree with me. He's looking out from the center of this sort of sphere of influence. And I'm also including this piece because it has the op art qualities, so to speak, or optical qualities, which within my lexicon, in my practice, I use as a metaphor for political optics. And here it's really maxed out in a very 60s way. And he was a very important independent socialist activist in the 1960s in particular. And so that has a way of directing the way that I visually make decisions about the visual matter in my work. And so the word changes are in there. And I'm thinking about directionality again. So I think my sense, I don't know, I'd be interested to sense, is there a directionality that you sense in this work?
Other than the circular bit, but the arrow, it's a little confusing to me only because the arrow is pointing in one direction. And then
Right.
the words are pointing in that direction, but then your eye goes up under 0 time and up to the top. So it's sort of very clockwise for me.
Yes. Okay. We are in agreement. So my intention was to bring the visual energy from that heavy arrow at the bottom up to the top, sort of that clockwise energy. And so it's moving up from the bottom. And that is a metaphor for his particular political sensibilities, that it really needs to be a political movement among the masses rather than through, autocracy, which is socialism from above. And he wrote about that extensively in various essays, but his best known essay was called The Two Souls of Socialism from 1966, where he historically analyzes the difference between socialism from below and socialism from above. And socialism gets a bad rap, particularly in the United States, because it's most often associated or denigrated because of its unfortunate history of coming from above,
Right.
such as through Stalin.
Right.
And so here I'm including references to certain kinds of workers, including artists. And so that's kind of my call to artists. Lost callers are, people who don't have the kind of work or identity with certain kinds of work that they may have had at another point in their lives, displaced workers, so forth. And so that's my phrase. So there's all these little questions about who I'm addressing in the work. I'm addressing workers in general, but they're the particular members of the masses that I want my viewers to think about in this case. So onto a piece that's at the TAM, again, more of the optical based pieces. This one's called Time. And I incorporated a quote from Huey P. Newton, who was one of the co-founders of the Black Panthers, was from a segment of the video on him from 1977. And, as I'm doing my research and I'm reading and I'm looking at videos and images online, and I'm reading things, very often I find that there's certain kinds of phrases or texts that really leap out at me, they register, because there's something about them that either coincides with a sensibility that I'm having, or it may have a correspondence to what's going on in society at this particular time. But this is also a prophetic. It's a hopeful statement as well. So it's a hypothesis, and I think that's why Max decided to put it into the show, because its call to the future is something that will make people ask, well, could that be?
Mhm.
This one is called Answerable, and it's a Leon Trotsky quote, and I'm forgetting offhand what the source was, but it says, a party represented in the government is answerable for the entire policy of the government as a whole. And so that was a nod to the sense of responsibility that the governing party should have. And we know that sometimes there's a lack of responsibility by certain members of certain parties who rule at a particular time. And so it's a somewhat abstract statement, but I think the abstraction works with the sense of the visual vibration, the cells in this kind of drawing. And I think if one lets it sink in, they might seem to relate it to a contemporary situation.
How do you choose the color scheme for these
Yeah,
series?
that's a good question. Very often, with this particular series, it was a little more intuitive. It was really about the sense of kind of tenor that is produced by a certain kind of contrast or color vibration.
Mhm.
Whereas my other pieces have more of a schematic use of color.
Right.
There's a fairly recent large piece of mine on canvas where it was produced through a collage methodology, much smaller on scale, and it's a collision of elements which seem to, I don't know, some people might think it may be indicative of where we're at right now.
Mhm.
This one I made around May, during concurrent with the Dobbs ruling on Roe versus Wade. And this particular piece, Bonapartist swing, which is a combination of my own phrasing and the term Bonapartist, which is used quite frequently in the left political world as a word that describes authoritarianism. And so we see a lot of suggestions of that coming from the radical right now. And then last but not least here in the series, recently I've made some linoleum prints, and I wanted to create a series. It's really not an edition, because an edition is multiples of the same thing.
Mhm.
What I decided to do is I carved the linoleum block, and of course you have to carve a printing block backwards. And so that was an interesting experience. So I haven't done that for a long time. And what I did with this, these are 4 out of a series of 10. And the typical way of printing a work in color in the graphic world is that you print the lightest colors, such as yellow, first,
Mhm.
and then the darker colors in sequence, and then black comes last, because black covers things up. And so what I'm doing here is that I'm taking really what is a very singular, flat textual image. It's a combination of all this language together, like a block of language, and adding various paper masks to produce resists that allow a certain color to only fill a certain portion of a word. But what happened because of this process, which came about actually rather intuitively, in order to kind of create more push and pull, sort of visual push and pull with space, was that the color layerings allowed me to look through the text, to look into the text, rather than just at the text and just read it. And so what happened is that there's a kind of in my opinion, a kind of almost landscape-like quality that emerges. And so multiple horizon lines and eclipses and suns and so forth, and striations, almost like, atmospheric striations that are created here. And so there's many layers to these pieces. They're all the same, but they're all different. And that bespeaks the changes as well. And so I'm able to generate different kinds of semantic qualities really out of the same language in multiple pieces. So that's my last slide right here. And I thank you very, very much for allowing me to speak today. This has been an absolute pleasure. And hope it gives you everybody a little more insight into how and why I do things, and hope they enjoy the TAM show.
Did you have a chance to go to the opening?
Yes, I was there at the opening. It was great. It was great to see it. Look, it's a beautifully installed show, and I think the space of the gallery space, the architectural space of the TAM really allows the work to breathe and allows people to really engage and enjoy the work. It does not feel crowded, and that's very important.
Yes, and I think a lot of that Max is, very cognizant of the number of pieces that he selects, and doesn't have these enormous shows that have to fit into the main gallery in particular. And even in gallery 2, which is right now filled
Right.
with a lot of pieces of paper, he is very aware, I think, of that spatial aspect of how much can fit in. Quickly before you go, particularly
Yes.
some of the earlier pieces,
Mhm.
where you have the mix of text.
Mhm.
There's a couple of Basquiat pieces that come to mind that are very,
Oh, yes.
with a lot of words that you want to stand in front and just actually want to just buy them so that you can read them in perpetuity in your home. But how long would a piece like one of those more involved pieces, the larger pieces, how long would it take you from that initial concept all the way through those iterations of realizing, oh, I need a larger canvas or I need a larger paper? How long does it take?
Yes. That's a great question. Well, for the SWP chart, the giant chart that's at TAM, that took me about 8 months
Oh.
of constant work, and I had done a lot of research prior to that. But along the way, there's plenty of questions that emerge, and so I'd have to do my fact checking and drawing, kind of interchangeably. But the drawing aspect just really takes a lot of time. So for instance, like on the sidebars, to give you an amount of time, a sense of time, I'd usually only be able to accomplish maybe 4 or 5 lines of small text within maybe like a 5-hour period.
Oh,
It's
wow.
just
Okay.
ridiculously tedious process that would be very physically challenging and mentally challenging. You just have to discipline oneself and just do it, and go in there and remember what my mission was. In terms of a lot of the other pieces, I think my average would be somewhere between 3 weeks and 5 weeks to
Okay.
produce many of the works, and especially if the prototype phases were multiple.
Okay.
And Of course, a larger scale piece requires more time, but yes, all that writing takes lots of time.
Yes, yes. The piece that's up now has that. I'm almost reluctant to say Warhol-esque quality because I do know that all
Mhm.
that hand lettering. I mean, I know that he did that. I was having a conversation with someone the other day about not understanding the whole Campbell soup thing, and I thought,
Right.
and I don't think they understood. I'm like, oh, it wasn't a photograph, he hand did all that. So, there is that attention that you have to, I can only imagine that when you get to, the last 25 words or so, that idea, it's almost like when you're typing a big long manuscript on an old typewriter when you didn't have erasable ribbon back in the day.
It's a hallelujah moment.
Right,
It's like,
right.
all right, I've finally reached the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you bring up Basquiat and Warhol. I mean, that both artists have been very important to me through the years. In addition to the Dadists and the constructivists, the collage artists, the conceptual artists, there's actually a fair amount of influence upon what I do, according to the history of political ephemera. But my work winds up being far more juicy than that stuff
Yes.
ever really is. That stuff seems quite dry.
Yes.
Whereas I think um, because I'm somehow I've come to this point where I'm not loose with my text in the final piece. So any kind of gestuality that one might see in, let's say, the Basquiat influence seems to be lost in the final work.
Sure, sure. I think along what you were just saying, I'm so sorry. I had it and then lost it. Um, but when I look at your work, particularly the work that has a lot on the, in the visual field of what you're looking at,
Mhm.
I do some of those Basquiat that are very heavily word based come to mind. There's one that's all words.
Right.
And that you'd be standing like your own piece, you'd be standing in front of for that piece. Yes, you'd be standing
Yes.
in front of it for a very long time.
Right.
And again, I think that, his work too calls into play
Mm,
some of those more controversial subjects. He does a lot of racially charged work. And so, like I say in a lot of these talks, the key to, your work has a very unique quality of weaving history, uh,
mm,
political history in your case, but history in general, into the work itself. I know Sandow Burke had a very
right.
allegorical sort of, weaving of into his pieces. And so, to have you all together, I understand you're also going to be part of the panel discussion on the 29th.
Yes, I will be. I look forward to it.
Yeah, that will be very, very engaging. I hope that Max is moderating that. Um,
Yes, he is.
oh, great. That's fantastic. I think it's you and Allison and
And Michelle Jacqui.
yeah, Michelle Jacques. Right, right.
Yes, Jacques.
Jacques. Yeah, she did it. She did our last TAMA talk a couple of days ago. So again,
Oh,
really want to thank you so much for explaining. And I hope that people, like I said, with her work also, her episode, I do hope that people will watch this and then go to the museum to kind of get a better understanding
mm,
of what it is that, you're trying to convey with the work, and the fact that they are going to just have to reconcile the idea that the museum is open from 11 to 5 and they may spend all of that time in front of all of this work kind of absorbing it all, because there is a cerebral nature to it that I think is tapped by all of the work so far that we've discussed in these TAMA talks. So
yes, yes, absolutely. So yeah, it engages the mind and the eye and ways of art making and the world too. And that's a That's a really nice combination of things.
It certainly is, and I think it's evident with a lot of the work that's selected to be at the TAM. So, so happy that you could join us, and I thank you